The first time I realized my mother had chosen my brother over me, it wasn't at the lawyer's office or during the funeral. It was when I opened the envelope and saw my name missing, like I'd never existed at all. I stood in my kitchen holding those papers, my hands shaking so hard the pages rattled against each other. My teenage son, Marcus, was sitting at the table doing homework, unaware that our entire future had just been erased with a signature I never saw coming. Everything had been signed over to my brother. The house my father promised would be split evenly, the savings he built brick by brick, the land he worked overtime to protect so his children would never struggle the way he did. Gone, quietly, legally, without my knowledge. And my mother had been there for every signature. I called her immediately. My voice sounded calm, but my chest felt like it was caving in. "Mom," I said, "why is my name not on any of this?" There was a pause, a long one, the kind where someone is deciding how much truth they're willing to admit. "Rochelle," she finally said, "your brother needed stability." I swallowed. "And I didn't?" "You have a child," she replied. "You're strong. You'll figure it out." That was the moment something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but deep enough to change everything. I had spent my whole life believing family came first, that blood meant protection, that a mother would never deliberately leave her daughter unprotected. But standing there, listening to her justify stealing my inheritance like it was a practical decision, I understood something painful and permanent. She had already chosen. The funeral had been less than a month earlier. I remembered standing beside my brother, holding Marcus's hand, promising my father at his graveside that I'd make him proud. I remembered my mother crying into my shoulder, telling me how much she needed me. All of it felt fake now. I didn't scream at her. I didn't accuse her. I asked one more question instead. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her answer was soft, careful. "I didn't want conflict." I laughed then, one sharp, bitter sound that startled my son in the other room. Conflict, apparently, was me finding out. Within weeks, the house I was living in, technically my father's, was no longer mine to stay in. My brother said it gently, almost apologetically. He had plans. He needed space. He said he'd help if he could. He didn't. I packed our lives into trash bags and borrowed boxes, while my mother avoided my calls. Marcus asked questions I didn't know how to answer yet. "Where are we going, Mom?" I said, "Somewhere safe," and praying that was still true. The shelter didn't look like safety when we arrived. Fluorescent lights, thin walls, the smell of exhaustion hanging in the air. I signed papers with shaking hands while trying not to cry in front of my son. That night, lying on a narrow bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling and felt shame wash over me in waves. Not because I was weak, but because I trusted the wrong people with my future. Depression crept in quietly after that. Some mornings, getting out of bed felt like lifting concrete. I replayed every memory, every conversation, searching for the moment I should have seen it coming. But something else lived there too. Anger. Not the explosive kind, but the kind that sharpens you, the kind that whispers, "You will not end here." I started asking questions about school, about certifications, about rebuilding credit I didn't even realize had been damaged by years of depending on family. I went to classes during the day and worked nights when I could. I studied while Marcus slept. No one clapped for me. No one came to save me. And slowly, painfully, I stopped waiting for them to. Years passed. We moved out of the shelter, then into a small apartment, then into something better. I rebuilt everything they thought I'd survive without noticing. And then, one afternoon, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice sounded older, smaller. She needed help. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, not with rage, but with memory, because helping her would mean facing everything she'd done, and the choice I was about to make would define who I had become. But she didn't know yet that the daughter she once dismissed as strong enough was no longer the woman she had underestimated, and I wasn't sure yet whether peace would cost more than revenge. I didn't answer my mother's call right away. I let it ring until the silence felt intentional instead of accidental. Then I turned the phone face down on the table and went back to helping Marcus with his math homework, even though the numbers on the page kept blurring in front of me. That call cracked open memories I'd sealed tight just to survive. Back in the shelter, time moved differently. Days were loud, nights were restless, and privacy didn't exist. I learned to sleep lightly, one ear always open, my arm instinctively stretched toward my son. Marcus tried to be brave for me. He stopped asking for things, he stopped complaining. That hurt more than anything else. One night, while folding donated clothes on the bed, he asked quietly, "Did Grandma know this would happen to us?" I didn't answer right away. "I think she knew it would be hard," I finally said. He nodded slowly, like he'd already expected that answer. That was the night I decided I would never again let anyone confuse love with sacrifice that only flows one way. I started going back to school, not because I felt confident, but because fear had stopped being louder than purpose. I signed up for certifications that promised stability, not dreams, stability, something no one could take from me with paperwork and excuses. I rebuilt my credit line by line, bill by bill. I learned words like APR and utilization the way some people learn prayers. Every point I gained felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't known I'd lost. My mother never once visited us. She sent a message once through my brother asking how Marcus was doing. I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to speak without shaking. The depression came in waves. Some days I moved like I was underwater. Other days I felt unstoppable. Therapy helped me understand that grief isn't just about death. It's about betrayal. It's about losing the people you thought would catch you when you fell. And my anger, it became fuel, not for revenge, but for movement. Years passed quietly. That's the part people don't talk about. Healing isn't cinematic. It's repetitive. It's boring. It's choosing consistency when no one is watching. It's showing up, even when the applause never comes. Marcus grew taller. His voice deepened. He started talking about college, about wanting to study engineering. He never once asked his grandmother for help. He learned early what I learned late. We built a life that fit us. Not fancy, but solid, warm, honest. And then came that call. When I finally listened to the voicemail, my mother's voice sounded fragile in a way I'd never heard before. "Rochelle," she said softly, "I don't know who else to ask." I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. This was the moment every hurt daughter imagines and dreads at the same time. The moment when power shifts, when the person who once dismissed your pain needs your hands to steady them. I wasn't that broke woman anymore. I wasn't that daughter waiting to be chosen. I wasn't that mother praying her child wouldn't feel her fear. But I was still human. And the question wasn't whether I could help her. It was whether helping her would cost me the peace I had worked so hard to build. Because strength had become my inheritance, and I wasn't willing to give it away lightly. That decision, whether to open the door or keep it closed, was coming faster than I expected. And once I made it, there would be no pretending anymore. I met my mother a week later at a small clinic on the south side of town, neutral ground. I wasn't ready to step into her house, or what used to be my father's house, without my emotions turning sideways. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her shoulders curved inward now, like life had been pressing down on her for years while I was busy surviving mine. Her hair was grayer. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. For a moment, I almost forgot everything. Then I remembered the shelter, the trash bags, Marcus asking questions I couldn't answer, and the memory settled me back into myself. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. I nodded. "You said you needed help." She took a breath. "I do." Her health had declined. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just the slow accumulation of years catching up to her. Doctor visits, medications, bills that didn't stretch the way they used to. My brother, she said, was overwhelmed, busy, distant. The irony didn't escape me. "So," I said carefully, "what are you asking me for?" She hesitated. "Help managing things, appointments, paperwork, sometimes just someone to be there." I watched her face closely, waiting, wondering if this was where she would acknowledge what she had done, if this was where the truth would finally be spoken without justification or softness. It wasn't. Instead, she said, "You were always the responsible one." There it was again, the compliment that had cost me everything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I asked the question I had carried for years. "Do you know what it did to us?" I asked, "when you chose him?" Her eyes filled, not with shock, but with discomfort. I didn't think it would be that bad. That sentence hit harder than any denial could have. "I lived in a shelter," I said quietly. "My grandson did homework under flickering lights. I rebuilt my life from nothing while you stayed silent." She looked down. I was ashamed. "Of what?" I asked. "What you did, or what it cost me?" She didn't answer, and suddenly I understood something I hadn't before. My mother wasn't cruel, she was avoidant. She had chosen the path of least resistance and called it practicality. She had mistaken fairness for inconvenience, and I had paid the price. "I can help," I said finally, "but not the way you're asking." She looked up quickly. "I won't manage everything, I won't clean up decisions I didn't make, and I won't pretend the past didn't happen." Her mouth opened slightly. "Rochelle!" "I'll help you find resources, doctors, assistants, support systems, but I won't be your safety net. I had to build my own." Tears slipped down her face then, real ones, not performative, not strategic. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. "I know, but intention doesn't erase impact." We sat in silence after that, not hostile, not warm, just honest. When I stood to leave, she reached for my hand. I let her hold it, but I didn't squeeze back. That boundary mattered. On the drive home, my chest felt tight, not with regret, but with release. I had told the truth without cruelty. I had offered compassion without self-betrayal. I had shown Marcus what strength looks like when it's rooted in self-respect. When I got home, he looked up from the couch. "How did it go?" "I helped, and I protected us." He nodded, understanding more than I ever wanted him to have. That night, lying in bed, I thought about inheritance. Not money, not property, not land signed away in quiet rooms. What my mother gave my brother was temporary. What I had built was permanent. Resilience, clarity, boundaries, and the realization settled deep in my bones. She had taken my inheritance once, but I had created one no one could ever steal. Still, The story wasn't finished yet, because helping her from a distance would test me in ways I hadn't anticipated, and the final lesson, the one about forgiveness without forgetting, was still ahead. Helping my mother from a distance sounded clean when I said it out loud, structured, controlled, safe. In practice, it was none of those things. The first week it was small, phone calls to clinics, lists of medications, appointment reminders sent by text. I treated it like a project, something I could manage with checklists and boundaries clearly labeled. I didn't ask about her feelings. I didn't revisit the past. I stayed focused on logistics. But emotional history doesn't respect systems. It slipped in through tone, through pauses, through the way she said my name like she was reaching for something familiar she no longer had access to. "Rochelle," she'd say, "do you remember how your father liked his coffee?" Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. Marcus noticed before I did. He always did. "You okay?" he asked one evening as I stared at my phone longer than necessary after one of her calls. "I'm fine," I said automatically. He tilted his head. "You don't look fine." That stopped me. I realized I was carrying something I hadn't named yet. Not guilt, not anger, but vigilance. I was constantly scanning myself, checking whether compassion was turning into obligation, whether helping was quietly becoming erasure. That's how it starts. One afternoon, my brother called. We hadn't spoken in years, not really, not since the day he asked me when I'd be back on my feet, like homelessness had been a brief inconvenience instead of a defining trauma. "Hey," he said, too casually, "Mom says you've been helping." "Yes," I replied, "from a distance." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Good, she needs you right now." The familiarity of that sentence made my stomach tighten. I'm not stepping in, I'm supporting. There's a difference. "Well," he said, his tone shifting, "someone has to take responsibility." I closed my eyes. "I already did," I said, "years ago, alone." Silence. Then he said the thing I hadn't known I was bracing for. "You're still holding a grudge." I felt something cold and steady settle into my chest. This isn't a grudge, it's memory. He scoffed. "You always were dramatic." I ended the call without saying goodbye. That night I couldn't sleep, not because I doubted myself, but because the past was knocking louder now, demanding to be resolved on terms that had never protected me. I thought about how easily people rewrite history when consequences arrive late, how often women are expected to be the soft landing for choices they didn't make, how quickly strength gets mistaken for availability. The next week, my mother crossed a line. She showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door and froze. She stood there holding a bag of old photos and papers, her eyes hopeful in a way that felt dangerously close to expectation. "I was in the area. I thought maybe we could talk." Marcus was in his room. My sanctuary was behind me. I stepped outside and closed the door. "We agreed on boundaries," I said quietly. "I know, I just thought—" "I know what you thought, and that's the problem." She looked wounded. "I'm trying, Rochelle." "So am I, but not at my own expense." She nodded, tears pooling, and turned to leave. I watched her walk away feeling something complicated, not triumph, not guilt, but grief, not for what we were losing now, but for what had never existed in the first place. That night, Marcus asked, "Was Grandma here?" "Yes," I said. "Did she come inside?" "No." He nodded. "Good." That word, good, stayed with me, because protecting my peace didn't mean I lacked compassion, it meant I had learned discernment. Still, the tension was building between who I had been taught to be and who I had become, between forgiveness and access, between love and accountability. and I knew deep down that a bigger confrontation was coming. Not loud, not explosive, but necessary, because you can't heal a wound that keeps being reopened, and I was done bleeding quietly. The bigger confrontation didn't arrive with raised voices or slammed doors. It arrived disguised as a request that sounded reasonable enough to trap anyone who hadn't learned how to listen beneath the words. My mother called one morning while I was getting ready for work. "I have a favor to ask," she said, her voice careful, almost gentle. I leaned against the bathroom counter, already alert. "Go ahead." "I was thinking," she continued, "since you've been helping with appointments and paperwork, maybe it would make sense for you to come to the next meeting with the social worker. They keep asking about family support." There it was. Not a demand, not an apology, an assumption. "I can't do that," I said calmly. There was a pause, then confusion. "Why not? It's just one meeting." "One meeting becomes a pattern," I replied, and we agreed on distance. Her tone shifted, softening into something that used to undo me. "Rochelle, I'm tired. I don't have the energy to explain everything. You know how these systems work." I closed my eyes. She wasn't asking for help. She was asking for transfer. Transfer the responsibility, transfer the emotional labor, transfer the weight she had placed on me my entire life because I was strong. "I'll help you prepare," I said. "I'll write everything down, but I won't be there." She sighed. "I don't understand why you're making this so hard." That sentence landed like a quiet accusation. I didn't make it hard. I survived what was hard. Silence stretched between us. Then she said something I had never heard her say before. "Your brother doesn't have time." I almost laughed. "So it's about availability, not fairness." She didn't answer. After we hung up, I stood still for a long moment, my reflection staring back at me. I looked older than I had a few years ago, but not in a way that felt heavy. I looked seasoned, like someone who had learned when to stop explaining herself. At work, I couldn't focus. My thoughts kept circling one question. How much help is too much when history is unresolved? That evening, Marcus and I ate dinner together, something we'd protected fiercely over the years. No phones, no television, just us. "Grandma's asking for more, isn't she?" he asked casually. "Yes," I admitted. He chewed slowly, then said, "You don't have to keep proving you're a good person." That stopped me cold. "I know," I said quietly. "No," he said gently. "I don't think you do. Children see things clearly when adults complicate them." Later that night, I pulled out an old folder I rarely opened. Inside were copies of the documents that erased me, the signatures, the dates, the quiet finality of it all. I hadn't looked at them in years. I read them now, not with rage, but with clarity. This wasn't just about money. It was about choice. My mother had chosen ease over equity, silence over honesty, my brother's comfort over my security. And now she wanted reconciliation without reckoning. That wasn't healing. That was avoidance wearing the costume of family. The next day, I called her back. "I've thought about your request," I said. Her relief was immediate. "Thank you, Rochelle." "I need to say something first," I interrupted gently. She went quiet. "I can help you within the limits I've set, but if you want more access, more involvement, more of me, you have to acknowledge what happened, out loud, without excuses." Her breath caught. "You mean the inheritance," she said softly. "Yes," I replied, "and what it cost." "I already said I was ashamed." "That's not the same. Ashamed is about you. I need accountability." The line was silent long enough to wonder if the call had dropped. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know if I can do that." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Then this is as far as I can go. She whispered my name, something breaking through her voice. But I didn't move, because I knew now that compassion without truth would always cost me more than it healed. When we hung up, my hands were steady. I had drawn a line, not in anger, but in clarity. Still, I felt the weight of what I'd done settled in my chest. Not regret, but consequence, the kind that comes when you choose yourself in a family that taught you not to. That night I couldn't sleep, not because I doubted my decision, but because I knew the next move wouldn't be mine. Either my mother would finally face what she'd done, or she would retreat into the same silence that had shaped everything, and whichever she chose would determine whether this story moved toward healing or ended in permanent distance. My mother didn't call the next day, or the day after that. The silence was familiar. She had always used it as a shield against conflict, against discomfort, against accountability. Growing up, silence meant something was wrong but would never be addressed. You were supposed to feel it, adjust yourself around it, and move on. This time, I didn't adjust. I let the quiet sit where it belonged. Days passed. Life continued. I went to work, cooked dinner, laughed with Marcus, paid bills, planned ahead. On the outside, nothing looked different. On the inside, something subtle but profound was shifting. I wasn't bracing anymore. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's when I realized how much energy I had spent my whole life preparing for disappointment. One evening, Marcus came home later than usual, excited and breathless. He'd been accepted into a summer engineering program, competitive, out of state, fully funded. "I did it, Mom," he said, eyes shining. I hugged him so tightly he laughed. In that moment, everything I had survived lined up into something meaningful. Every late night, every boundary, every decision not to break, even when breaking might have felt easier. This was the inheritance I was passing on. Not property, not money, but self-trust. That night, after Marcus went to bed, my phone buzzed. My mother. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Hello?" I said. Her voice sounded different, not fragile, not defensive, clear. "I've been thinking," she began, "about what you said." I stayed silent. "I want to tell you the truth, not the version that makes me feel better, the real one." My chest tightened, but I didn't interrupt. "When your father died," she said slowly, "I was scared. Scared of paperwork, of decisions, of being alone. Your brother pushed to handle things. He said he'd take care of me. He said you'd be fine because you always were." I closed my eyes. "And I let that be enough," she went on. "I didn't fight for you. I didn't even ask what you needed. I told myself it was practical, but it wasn't. It was easier." There it was. Not justification, not apology wrapped in excuses. Truth. "You chose him," I said quietly. "Yes, and it cost you everything." The words landed heavy, but clean. "I watched you struggle," her voice breaking now, "and I told myself you were strong because admitting otherwise meant admitting what I'd done." I exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry," she said, "not because I feel bad now, but because I was wrong then." Tears slipped down my face, not because everything was fixed, but because something had finally been named. "Thank you for saying it. That matters." "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quickly. "I don't even know if I deserve it." I considered that. "Forgiveness isn't the goal. Peace is." She nodded, though I could hear it in her breath more than her voice. "I accept whatever limits you need, even if that means you keep your distance." That was new too. We talked for a while longer, not about logistics, not about next steps, just truth, uncomfortable, unpolished truth. When we hung up, I felt drained, but lighter. Not healed, but unburdened. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of calm I hadn't expected. Not relief, not triumph, alignment. I knew where I stood now, and more importantly, so did she. Helping her didn't feel like erasure anymore. It felt like a choice, one I could make or unmake without guilt. That distinction changed everything. I told Marcus what had happened over breakfast. He listened quietly, then said, "I'm glad she finally told the truth." "So am I replied. "Does that mean everything's okay now?" he asked. I smiled softly. "It means everything's honest now, and that's better." He nodded, satisfied. In the weeks that followed, I helped my mother in small, intentional ways. I sent resources, made referrals, checked in when I chose to. I didn't take over. I didn't disappear. I stayed present without dissolving. And for the first time, she respected that. Still, there was one final test ahead, one moment that would determine whether this fragile honesty could turn into something lasting, or whether old patterns would reclaim their place. Because words matter, but actions tell the truth. And the next choice my mother made would show me whether she had truly changed or simply learned better language. That moment was coming, and when it did, I would be watching not as a wounded daughter, but as a woman who finally knew her worth.
The test came quietly, the way real tests usually do. Not announced, not dramatic, just a moment wrapped in normalcy, carrying the weight of everything that came before it. My mother asked if we could meet again, this time not at a clinic or on neutral ground, but at her house. My father's house, the one I had lost without warning, the one I hadn't stepped inside since the day my brother asked me to leave, his eyes sliding away from mine as if shame were contagious. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I'll come," I finally texted, "but Marcus won't." She replied almost immediately, "Of course, I understand." That alone told me she was trying, but trying isn't the same as changing. I had learned that the hard way. When I pulled into the driveway a few days later, my chest tightened despite myself. The house looked the same, fresh paint, trimmed hedges, new car in the driveway, evidence that my brother's stability had been built on my displacement. I sat in the car for a moment, grounding myself. I wasn't coming here to reclaim anything. I wasn't coming to confront ghosts. I was coming to observe. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She looked nervous, smoothing her cardigan, stepping aside to let me in. "Thank you for coming," she said. I nodded and walked past her, the familiar scent of the house hitting me all at once. Lemon cleaner, old wood, memory. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where my father used to read the paper every morning. She poured tea. Her hands shook slightly. "I wanted to talk about something important," she said. I waited. She slid a folder across the table toward me. Inside were documents, updated ones. "I spoke with a lawyer about what I can still make right." My heart thudded once, hard. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. She swallowed. "There are assets still in my name, accounts. I can't undo everything, but I can change what happens next." I didn't touch the folder yet. "And your son?" I asked. "Does he know you're doing this?" She hesitated just for a second. "It wasn't necessary," she said. There it was, the old pattern peeking through. "You need to," I said immediately. "If this is real, it can't be done in secret." She nodded slowly. "I know. I was just afraid he'd be upset." I met her eyes. That fear didn't stop you before. She flinched, but she didn't argue. I'll tell him, before anything is finalized. I finally opened the folder. The numbers weren't life-changing. They wouldn't erase the shelter years or the debt or the nights I cried in silence so Marcus wouldn't hear, but they were something. More than the money, though, was the acknowledgement. This wasn't about generosity, it was about responsibility. I need to be clear, I said. I'm accepting this not to make things even. There is no even. I'm accepting it as recognition. She nodded. That's fair. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of generations pressing gently but firmly between us. I also want to talk about Marcus, she said softly. My body tensed automatically. I want to contribute to his education, not control, not conditions, just support. I studied her face. She looked earnest, but I'd learned not to confuse intention with impact. I'll think about it, I said, but any help comes through me. No side conversations, no guilt, no expectations. I understand. She replied. I stood to leave soon after. At the door, she touched my arm lightly. I'm proud of you, not because you survived, but because you didn't let survival harden you. I paused. I didn't do this to be proud. I did it to be free. Driving away, I felt something unexpected, not relief, caution. Because while her words were right and the documents were real, I knew one truth too well to ignore. Change isn't proven in moments, it's proven in consistency. And there was still one person in this story who hadn't been confronted yet, my brother. He was the original beneficiary of my loss, the silent partner in my displacement, the one person whose accountability had never been tested. And until that happened, this story wasn't finished. Not by a long shot.
I didn't reach out to my brother right away. Not because I was afraid of the conversation, but because I wanted to be honest with myself first. I needed to know what I was actually asking for before I stepped into that space. Closure? An apology? Justice? None of those felt quite right. What I wanted was acknowledgement, not just from my mother, but from the person who had benefited most from my erasure. I wanted him to say my name in the story he had been telling himself all these years, to admit that his comfort had been purchased with my instability. That kind of truth can't be forced, but it can be invited. So I invited it. I sent him a simple message. We need to talk, not about Mom's health, about what happened after Dad died. He responded hours later. Sure, if that's what you want. The neutrality of his reply told me everything I needed to know. He didn't see this as overdue. He saw it as optional. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our lives, public enough to keep voices calm, neutral enough to prevent retreat. When I walked in, he was already there, scrolling on his phone, coffee untouched. He looked up and smiled like we were catching up after a misunderstanding. That smile disappeared when he saw my face. You look serious, he said. I am, I replied, taking a seat across from him. We didn't talk about the weather, or work, or Marcus. I didn't warm him up. I want to talk about the inheritance, I said plainly, and your role in it. He leaned back slightly, defensive already. I don't know what you think I did wrong. I nodded. That's why we're here. I laid it out calmly. The paperwork, the shelter, the years of rebuilding, the fact that he never once offered to share or even ask if we were okay. He listened with his arms crossed, jaw tight. I didn't know it was that bad, he said finally. I met his eyes. You knew we didn't have the house. That doesn't mean you knew you were homeless, he replied. You didn't ask, I said. That matters." He sighed. "Mom handled the estate. I just followed her lead." "No," I said. "You pushed for control. You accepted everything. You stayed silent because silence benefited you." His voice sharpened. "You make it sound like I stole from you." "I did," I said. "Legally? Maybe not. Morally? Absolutely." The word hung between us. He looked away first. "I had my own family to think about," he muttered. "And I didn't?" I asked quietly. That landed. For the first time, he looked uncomfortable, not angry, not defensive, just exposed. "I thought you'd land on your feet," he said. "You always do." There it was again, the compliment that excuses neglect. That belief cost my son his security. It cost me years I can't get back. He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know what you want from me now," he finally said. I considered him carefully before answering. "I want you to acknowledge that you benefited from my loss and that you never tried to make it right." He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "That's true." I felt something loosen in my chest. Not satisfaction, not forgiveness, recognition. "And?" I asked. "And I'm sorry," he said. Not in a vague way, in a specific one. I should have shared. I should have checked. I should have done better. I believed him, not because the words were perfect, but because they weren't polished. They came out heavy, uncomfortable, unprotected. "I'm not here to punish you, but I won't pretend this didn't shape my life." "I know," he replied. We didn't hug. We didn't reconcile. We finished our coffee in quiet, each of us sitting with what had finally been said. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. "If there's a way I can help now," he said, "I'm open." "I know." I meant it. Driving home, I didn't feel victorious. I felt complete. The story had finally been told all the way through, without minimizing, without rewriting, without silence doing the heavy lifting anymore. When I got home, Marcus was waiting. "How'd it go?" he asked. I told the truth, and it was received. He smiled. "That's good." "Yes, it is. Because whatever happens next, whether we grow closer or keep distance, it will be built on honesty, not obligation, and that changes everything." Still, there was one final choice left to make. Not about my mother, not about my brother, but about how I would carry this story forward, as a wound or as wisdom. That decision, the one that would define the ending, was mine alone. After the conversation with my brother, I thought I would feel lighter immediately, like something heavy had been lifted clean off my shoulders. Instead, what I felt was quieter, subtler, like the steady hum you notice only after a loud noise stops. The truth had been spoken, but now I had to decide what to do with it. For days, I moved through my routines with new awareness, not guarded, not raw, just present. I noticed how often my mind used to replay old conversations, imagining what I should have said, what I should have demanded. That loop was gone now. There was nothing left to argue with in my head. Marcus noticed the change too. "You seem lighter," he said one evening while we washed dishes together. "I think I finally stopped carrying things that weren't mine," I replied. He smiled. "About time." We laughed, but underneath it was something deeper, a shared understanding that our survival story had reached a turning point. My mother followed through on her word. She told my brother about the updated documents before finalizing anything. He wasn't happy, but he didn't fight it. That mattered more than apologies ever could. Accountability doesn't always sound kind. Sometimes it just sounds honest. She also began respecting my boundaries in small but meaningful ways. She asked before calling, she didn't drop hints, she didn't assume access. It wasn't perfect, but it was different, and different was enough. One afternoon, while organizing old files, I came across paperwork from my shelter days. Intake forms, case notes, proof of a version of myself that had been stretched thin but never broken. I sat on the floor reading them, tears sliding down my face, not from pain, but from pride. I had done this. Without inheritance, without backup, without permission. That was when it hit me. I didn't want to carry this story as bitterness or even as triumph. I wanted to carry it as guidance. So I started volunteering at the same community center that had helped me years ago. Nothing formal at first, just sitting with women who looked the way I once did. Tired, ashamed, still hopeful even when they didn't know it yet. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't need to. I told them this. You are not weak because your family failed you. You are not wrong for expecting fairness, and you are not required to forgive before you feel safe. Those words mattered. At home, Marcus began preparing for his program. Watching him plan his future with confidence, without fear of being erased, felt like the clearest proof that I had broken the cycle. One evening, my mother asked me a question I hadn't expected. "How did you do it?" she asked quietly. "Survive all of that without turning hard?" I thought about it. I didn't avoid becoming hard. I just chose when and where to be soft. She nodded, absorbing that. That night, alone in my room, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the shelter, the rebuilding, the confrontations, the truth finally spoken out loud. I realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't a single decision. It was a posture. One that didn't require forgetting or reopening doors that once harmed you. I wasn't forgiving to absolve them. I was forgiving to free myself. And that freedom didn't look like reconciliation dinners or holiday photos. It looked like peace. It looked like boundaries. It looked like choice. Still, there was one last step I hadn't taken yet. A moment that didn't involve anyone else's apology or growth. A moment where I would claim out loud what this journey had truly given me. Because strength wasn't just something I survived with. It was something I now owned. And in the final chapter of this story, I would name it. I didn't plan the moment when I finally named what this journey had given me. It happened the way most truths do, while I was busy doing something ordinary. I was sitting at my desk late one evening, sorting through paperwork for Marcus's summer program. Forms, deadlines, housing details, the kind of administrative work that once would have sent my anxiety spiraling because every decision used to feel like it carried the weight of survival. This time, it didn't. I paused mid-page, pen hovering over a signature line, and felt it clearly for the first time. I was no longer afraid of being undone. That realization stopped me cold. For so long, my strength had been reactive, built in response to loss, betrayal, abandonment. I had been strong because I had no choice, strong because someone had to be, strong because breaking wasn't an option when a child was watching. But this felt different. This strength didn't come from bracing, it came from grounding. I thought about the Rochelle I used to be, the one who believed that doing the right thing would protect her, the one who stayed quiet to keep peace, the one who trusted that fairness would naturally follow love. I didn't judge her anymore. She had survived with the tools she had, but I was no longer living from that place. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk before work. The neighborhood was quiet, the air crisp, the sky just beginning to shift from dark to light. As I walked, I thought about inheritance again, not the stolen one, but the one I was actively shaping. What had I truly inherited? Not money, not land, not family approval. I had inherited discernment, the ability to see patterns, the courage to name truth, the wisdom to know when helping becomes harm. And most importantly, I had inherited choice. At work, a colleague pulled me aside and asked how I stayed so calm under pressure. She'd seen me navigate difficult conversations with ease, advocate for myself without apology, and still show up with compassion. I surprised myself by answering honestly. I learned what happens when you don't, I said. That evening, Marcus and I sat on the couch reviewing his packing list. Clothes, notebooks, tools, reminders of home. "Are you nervous?" I asked him. "A little," he admitted, "but mostly excited." I smiled. That's how it should be. He looked at me for a long moment. "You know," he said, "a lot of kids don't get this far when stuff like what happened to us happens." "I know," I replied. "Why do you think we did?" he asked. The question wasn't academic. It was personal. Because we told the truth, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. He nodded, satisfied. Later that night, my mother called, not with a request, not with an update, but with gratitude. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, "for not cutting me off completely and for not letting me pretend." I appreciated the words, but I didn't cling to them. "You're welcome, and thank you for respecting the limits." When we hung up, I felt no urge to replay the conversation, no need to analyze it for hidden meaning. That, more than anything, told me how far I'd come. Peace no longer felt fragile, it felt practiced. I wrote in my journal that night, something I hadn't done in weeks, not to process pain, but to document clarity. Strength isn't what you endure, it's what you refuse to carry once you know better. As I closed the notebook, I realized there was one final conversation I needed to have, not with my mother, not with my brother, not even with Marcus, with myself. The woman who had lived in a shelter and still showed up, the woman who rebuilt without applause, the woman who chose peace without erasing memory. She deserved acknowledgement. And in the final part of this story, I would give it to her. Out loud, without shrinking, without apology. Because this ending wasn't about what my family took from me. It was about what I claimed back. And once I did, nothing would ever be able to take it away again. The conversation with myself didn't happen in front of a mirror or in the middle of a dramatic moment. It happened on an ordinary afternoon when the house was quiet and the sun hit the living room floor just right. Marcus was out with friends, and for once I didn't feel the need to fill the silence with noise or productivity. I sat on the couch and let my mind wander back to the shelter. Not as punishment, as recognition. I remembered the way the mattress dipped in the middle, how I used to sleep half awake so Marcus wouldn't feel my fear. I remembered the smell of institutional cleaner and the sound of other women crying softly at night, trying not to be heard. I remembered the version of myself who kept saying, "Just get through today." She had done more than that. She had carried us. And yet I realized something uncomfortable. I had never thanked her. I had moved on so quickly into rebuilding, into proving, into surviving the next phase, that I never stopped to honor the woman who made it possible. I closed my eyes and spoke aloud, my voice steady. "You did enough." The words landed heavier than I expected. You didn't fail, you weren't foolish, you trusted because you loved, and when that love wasn't returned fairly, you adapted. Tears came then, slow and warm, not frantic or sharp. "I release you from the burden of having to be strong all the time," I continued. "You don't have to earn safety anymore." Something loosened in my chest, a knot I hadn't realized was still there. That was the moment I understood the final truth of this journey. Healing isn't about fixing what others broke. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself that got left behind while you were surviving. In the days that followed, I felt different, not lighter exactly, but rooted.
Decisions came easier. Boundaries felt natural instead of rehearsed. I no longer second-guessed whether I was being too much or not enough. I was exactly right. My mother continued to show consistency, small things, respecting my time, following through on what she said she'd do. She even corrected someone once when they implied my brother had handled everything after my father died. My mother said, "She handled more than anyone knows." I heard about it later from a cousin. My mother didn't tell me herself. That mattered. My brother kept his distance, but it was a respectful one now. No guilt-laced messages, no sudden familiarity, just a quiet acknowledgement that something fundamental had shifted, and I was okay with that. One evening, Marcus sat beside me on the couch, his bags half-packed for his program. "You nervous about me leaving?" he asked. "A little," I admitted, "but not because I don't trust you, because I do." He smiled. "You know I wouldn't be ready for this if you hadn't gone through what you did." That sentence settled deep in my bones. I had spent years wondering what the shelter years had taken from him. Now I saw what they had given him. Perspective, resilience, integrity. The cycle had been broken, not through perfection, but through honesty. As his departure date approached, my mother asked if she could come see him off. I thought about it carefully before answering. "Yes," I said, "as long as it's about him, not us." She agreed without hesitation. That was growth. The night before Marcus left, I couldn't sleep, not from fear, but from reflection. I thought about how close I had come to internalizing my family's choices as proof of my worth, how easily that could have turned into bitterness or self-doubt. Instead, it had turned into clarity. But there was one more thing I needed to do before this chapter closed completely. One final act, not of confrontation, not of forgiveness, but of declaration. Because my story wasn't just about surviving betrayal, it was about choosing what kind of woman I would be after it. And the choice I was about to make would define the legacy I passed forward, not just to my son, but to myself. That choice would come tomorrow, and once I made it, this chapter of my life would finally, fully close. The morning Marcus left, I woke up before my alarm. The house was quiet, still wrapped in that soft darkness right before dawn. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee warming my hands and realized something simple but powerful. I wasn't anxious. Years ago, a morning like this would have unraveled me. My mind would have raced ahead to worst-case scenarios, to what-ifs shaped by loss and instability. But now, I felt steady, rooted, like someone who knew that whatever came next, she had the tools to face it. Marcus came down the hallway dragging his suitcase, half sleepy, half excited. We hugged longer than usual, not out of fear, but pride. When my mother arrived, she stayed in her place, present, respectful, focused on him. No guilt, no rewriting history, just support. That mattered more than she'll ever know. When his bus pulled away, I didn't cry. I waved until it disappeared, then took a deep breath and turned back toward my life, not the life I inherited, the one I built. Later that afternoon, I sat at my desk and did something I had never done before. I wrote my own declaration, not for court, not for family, not for validation, just for me. I wrote that I am no longer the daughter who accepts being overlooked. I am no longer the sister who pays the price for someone else's comfort. I am no longer the woman who confuses endurance with love. I am the woman who survived betrayal without becoming bitter. I am the mother who taught her son that honesty is stronger than inheritance. I am the person who chose peace without pretending the past didn't happen. My mother didn't give me an inheritance. My brother didn't protect me. My family didn't catch me when I fell. But I caught myself. And in doing so, I built something no document could ever erase. Strength became my inheritance. Boundaries became my wealth.
Clarity became my legacy. I didn't choose revenge when I had the chance. I chose wholeness, and that choice changed everything. If you learned something new from my life story, please like this video, subscribe to join our community for more stories like mine, and comment down below where you're watching this video from. I'd truly love to know.